The cease and desist letter arrived as a blurry photo in my Twitter messages at 11 o'clock at night, and the man who sent it had once held me by the throat against the kitchen counter while telling me I was the love of his life. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at it, this grainy image of a typed page with his signature scrawled at the bottom like he was somebody important, and I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to be sick. He was suing me over a joke. A joke I told to maybe 40 strangers in the back room of a bar. A joke that didn't even have his name in it. Let me back up because none of this makes sense unless you understand who I was before and who he turned me into and who I had to become to climb back out. My name is Nora. I'm not going to tell you my real name, obviously, but Nora is close enough. A few years before all of this happened, I was in a relationship that nearly ended me. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it almost literally. His name, let's call him Adam, and when I met him, he was the most magnetic person I had ever stood next to. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only lit window on a dark street. The kind of attention that, when it lands on you, makes everyone else in the room go gray and out of focus. I was 24, and I had never been looked at like that. I mistook the intensity for love. That was my first mistake, and it took me almost 2 years to understand it was a mistake at all. The thing about a person like Adam is that the cruelty doesn't arrive all at once. If it did, you'd run. Instead, it comes in slowly. The way a room gets cold after you turn the heat off, so gradually that by the time you're shivering, you've already convinced yourself this is just how the room is. This is just how rooms are. You're the one who's being sensitive about the temperature. First, it was the comments. Then it was deciding who I could see. Then it was the silences that stretched for days, where I'd apologize for things I couldn't name just to make the air breathable again. And then, eventually, it was his hands. I'm not going to describe all of it. I made my peace with most of it, and I don't owe anyone the whole inventory. But I'll tell you about one moment, because it's the moment that matters for this story. There was a night, and it was one of the bad nights, one of the ones where I genuinely did not know if I was going to be okay when the sun came up. And in the middle of it, in the middle of him doing something that should have had nothing funny in it whatsoever, he stopped and he said the strangest, most out-of-nowhere thing. It was almost whimsical. It was the kind of observation a person might make staring out a train window on a lazy afternoon, except he made it while he had his hands on me in a way no person should ever put their hands on someone they claim to love. And my brain, which I think had simply detached itself from my body to survive, latched onto the absurdity of it. The grotesque, surreal mismatch between what he was doing and what he was saying. Some part of me, even then, filed it away. Even while I was terrified, some small clerk in the back office of my mind picked up that detail and stamped it. Remember this. I got out eventually. That's a whole other story, and it has its own scars, but I got out. I changed my number. I blocked him on everything I could think of. I moved. I rebuilt, slowly, the way you rebuild after a fire. Sifting through what's left, deciding what's still good, throwing out what's beyond saving. And one of the things I built almost by accident was comedy. It started because a friend dragged me to an open mic night. I have a day job, a normal, boring, good day job that I have no intention of ever quitting, and I'm not a comedian in any professional sense. I have never made $1 from a stage. Sometimes the bartender slides me a free drink. That's the extent of my career. But that first night, watching nervous people get up under a hot light and turn their worst moments into something a room full of strangers could laugh at, something cracked open in me. I thought, I could do that. I have material. God, do I have material? So I started telling stories. And one of the stories I told, the one that became my best bit, the one that always landed, the one that got the biggest laugh of the night every single time, was the story of that strange, whimsical thing Adam said to me on one of the worst nights of my life. Here's the part that's hard to explain. The situation itself is not funny. There is nothing funny about what was happening when he said it, but the contrast is funny. The sheer cosmic absurdity of a person doing something monstrous and then pausing to make a comment so trivial, so bizarrely lighthearted that it belonged in a completely different scene of a completely different life. I built a whole bit around the imagined train of thought that could possibly lead a person to say that thing at that moment. The musings I invented about what was going on in his head, Those were fabricated, obviously. I'm not a mind reader. But the thing he said and the thing he was doing, those were real. Every word. I never embellished the truth. I only colored in the silence around it. And I never, not once, used his name. I never described what he looked like. I never said where he worked or where he lived or anything that could possibly identify him. We live in a city of millions. I'm not famous. The 40 people in that bar had no way of knowing this story was about any specific human being who walks around on this earth. To them, it was a story. A dark, weirdly hilarious story told by a woman with a microphone. That's all. For a long time, telling that joke was the most healing thing I did. There's an old idea that if you can laugh at something, it loses its power over you. That if a thing becomes so small, so trivial, so manageable that you can make a room full of strangers laugh at it, then it can't sit on your chest at 3 in the morning anymore. And it was true. Every laugh was a brick I pulled out of the wall he'd built around me. Every laugh said, "You don't own this anymore." I do. I took it back. And then one of those laughs got recorded. It was an acquaintance, not a close friend, just a woman I knew from around, someone who happened to be at the bar that night. Let's call her Brielle. Brielle thought the bit was great, and she did what people do now, which is she filmed a chunk of it on her phone and posted it to her Snapchat story. She wasn't trying to do anything bad. She thought she was supporting me. She thought she was sharing something funny. She had absolutely no idea that the man in the story was a real person, let alone that she happened to know that real person, let alone that he and I had ever crossed paths in our lives. It was a coincidence so unlikely that if I had written it into one of my bits, the audience would have groaned at how contrived it was. But that's the thing about a big city that's actually a small world stitched together. Adam followed Brielle on Snapchat. I don't know how they knew each other. Some tangential social thread, a party, a mutual friend, the kind of loose connection that means nothing until suddenly it means everything. He watched her story. He heard the joke. And somewhere in that grainy 10-second clip, with no name and no description, he recognized himself. Think about that for a second. He recognized himself in a story with no identifying details, told by an anonymous woman to a room of strangers. He heard the description of the despicable thing, and he immediately, instantly, with total certainty, thought, "That's me." Nobody told him. Nobody pointed at him. His own conscience walked right up and tapped him on the shoulder. I found out about any of this because Brielle called me, mortified. Adam had started messaging her the second he saw the clip. Where was this? What bar? What else did she say about me? Who is she? How do you know her? Demand after demand after demand. At first, Brielle, not understanding the danger and not connecting any dots, told him the name of the bar. We go there all the time. It's basically our spot. She didn't know any better, and I genuinely don't blame her for it. But then he kept pushing. The messages got more aggressive, more frantic, more wrong. He started scaring her. And to her credit, she trusted that instinct, blocked him, and immediately called me to tell me what had happened and to apologize for letting slip the name of the bar. She was nearly in tears. I told her it was okay. It was okay. She couldn't have known. What would you have done in this situation? I'd really love to know. Drop it in the comments, because I have gone back and forth on whether I handle the next part right 1,000 times since. Because the next part was the DM. Twitter was the one place I had never blocked him, mostly because I'd forgotten the account existed. It was an old, half-dead account I never checked. And that's exactly where he found the crack in the wall. The message came through, and I almost didn't open it. And then I did. And there was a wall of text accusing me of telling lies about him, of committing character assassination, of defamation. And attached, as a photograph, was a cease and desist letter. An actual, formatted, signed cease and desist letter, stating his intent to sue me and to compensate for the damages done to his reputation. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th. Here's what went through my head in order. First, it's not a lie. It is not a lie. Every word of that story is true. He did the thing. He said the thing. I have lived with the memory of both for years. You cannot defame someone with the truth. That's not how any of this works. Even I knew that much. Second, I never used his name. Nobody knew it was him. The only person on the entire planet who connected that anonymous joke to Adam was Adam himself. He had, in a very real sense, defamed himself by raising his hand in a crowd and shouting that's about me. And third, and this was the thought that made my hands cold, he found me. He has my account. He knows the bar. He is paying attention to me again. That third thought was the one that mattered because I knew Adam. I knew that the legal threat was never really about the law. Adam didn't care about defamation statutes. Adam cared about control. The lawsuit was a leash he was trying to throw back around my neck. The whole point of the cease and desist wasn't to win in court. It was to remind me that he could still reach me, that no matter how far I'd run, there was still a string between us, and he could still give it a pull whenever he wanted, and I would still feel it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up and I did what anyone does now. I went online and I asked strangers what to do. And the strangers, bless them, were a mix of reassuring and darkly funny. One person told me to put the whole experience in my next set. Another told me, in lawyer-adjacent terms, that in the wildly unlikely event he actually filed suit, my attorney would simply ask him one devastating question. Why is it that when the public hears a story about a despicable act with no name attached, your identity is the very first thing that leaps to their minds? And that, the stranger said, would be the end of it. Someone else told me to check my renter's insurance, because some policies will actually provide a lawyer in situations like this. Practical stuff, sane stuff. It helped. It made me feel, for a few hours, like I was a person dealing with a manageable problem and not a woman standing at the edge of a hole she'd already climbed out of once, watching a familiar hand reach up toward her ankle. So I made a decision, and the decision was, I would not respond. I would not engage. I would give him exactly zero of the reaction he was so clearly fishing for. I would keep living my life. I would keep my job. I would keep my friends. And this was the part that felt like reclaiming my own spine. I would keep telling jokes. I was not going to let a cease and desist letter take the one room in my life where I'd learned to laugh again. He didn't get that. He didn't get to have that. For a few days, it worked. I ignored the DM. I didn't reply to the letter. I went to work. I saw my friends. I told myself it was over, that he'd huffed and puffed and would now slink off to whatever corner of the city he lived in and leave me alone. I almost believed it. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We post new stories like this one every single day, and I promise you the part that comes next is the part you'll want to be around for. Because a few days after I decided to ignore him, he showed up at the bar. I wasn't there that night, thank God. I found out because my friends called me, and they were rattled. Adam had walked into our spot, the bar Brielle had accidentally named, and he'd started asking around for me. By name. Asking the bartender, asking the regulars, asking anyone who'd make eye contact. Do you know Nora? Is Nora here? When does Nora come in? And by every account, he was drunk, slurring, unsteady, the works. Which sounds like a small detail, but it gutted me, because after our breakup I'd heard, through the grapevine, through the way you hear things about a person you used to share a life with, that he'd gotten sober, that he'd cleaned up, that he was doing better. And here he was, 3 sheets to the wind, hunting for me in a bar at night. Whatever recovery he'd built, the joke had apparently knocked it down, and that scared me more than anything, because a drunk Adam was a less predictable Adam, and an unpredictable Adam was the most dangerous version of him I knew. My friends told him to get lost. The bartender told him to leave, and he left that time. But the message was received loud and clear, and the message was, I know where you go. I will come to the places you go. The wall you built has a door in it, and I just walked through. I barely had time to process the bar incident before the next front opened up, and this one was worse because this one came for the one thing I had been desperately trying to protect. My job. Adam started contacting people at my workplace. Through social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever he could find a thread to pull. And he didn't just message my friends there. He messaged people who barely knew I existed. He messaged, among others, someone very high up in upper management, a person who would struggle to pick me out of a lineup, who knew me only as a name on an org chart. And he sent them all the same opening message, that he was trying to reach me, that it was urgent, that he just needed my phone number or my email. Could they please help him get in touch? A couple of my colleagues actually responded, kindly, professionally, the way you do. They told him they couldn't share my personal information, but that they'd let me know he was looking for me. Reasonable. Human. And the second they showed him that little bit of courtesy, the second he understood that these were people who knew me, who worked beside me, whose opinion of me mattered, he turned. He started threatening them. He started warning them about me, casting himself as some concerned citizen, alerting them to the dangerous, deceitful woman in their midst. And then, and I can barely type this even now, he started telling them sexually explicit things about me. Graphic, degrading, invented, or twisted details, the kind of thing designed for one purpose only, to humiliate me in the eyes of the people I had to sit in meetings with on Monday morning. Are you sure she's the type of person you want working here? He asked them. Are you sure you know who she really is? I cannot describe to you the specific horror of that. It's one thing to be harassed. It's another thing to be harassed at the one place that was supposed to be untouchable, the place that represented the normal, stable life I'd clawed my way back to. He wasn't just trying to reach me anymore. He was trying to poison me, to make sure that even if he couldn't have me back under his thumb, he could at least make the rest of my life as toxic as the part I'd escaped from. He wanted to take my career down with him, like a drowning man grabbing whoever's closest. I had spent this entire ordeal, months of it now, desperately trying not to drag my private nightmare into my professional life. I did not want to be the woman with the drama. I did not want my coworkers looking at me with that careful, pitying, slightly wary expression people get around someone with a situation. I wanted to be good at my job and otherwise invisible. I had worked so hard to keep these two worlds apart. And Adam smashed them together for me. He did the thing I'd been killing myself to prevent. So I finally accepted that I could not handle this alone, and I did the thing I'd been avoiding. I asked for help. There was a woman in my company who worked in our legal department, someone I knew well enough to trust and who I knew would be kind about it. I went to her and I told her, not all of it, but enough, and I braced myself for the discomfort, the awkwardness, the sense of having exposed something shameful. And instead, she just got quiet, and then she got angry on my behalf in the best way. She walked me through how to get a restraining order, a temporary restraining order, a TRO. She explained the process step by step. She told me what to document, what to bring, what to expect. And then she put me in touch with an attorney she knew personally who practiced in exactly this area, in case it escalated to the point where I'd need one. I really hoped I wouldn't. But I took the number, and for the first time in this whole mess, I felt something other than fear. I felt backed up. I felt like I had people standing behind me instead of a hole behind me. So I filed for the TRO. I gathered everything. The DMs, the cease and desist photo, Brielle's account of his messages, the bar incident with witnesses, the messages he'd sent to my coworkers, which several of them were willing to forward to me and to corroborate. It was laid out all together like that, a genuinely overwhelming pile of evidence. Seeing it all in one place was its own kind of awful, because it forced me to admit how serious this had become. This wasn't a guy being petty about a joke. This was a documented, escalating pattern of harassment by a man with a history of violence toward me specifically. The TRO was granted. He was served, and I exhaled just a little because surely now that a court had formally told him to stay away, now that there was a legal line in the sand with real consequences attached, surely now he would stop. He did not stop. Literally 2 days after the temporary restraining order was granted and Adam had been served the papers, 2 days, he showed up at the bar again, drunk again, and this time I was there. I will never forget the moment I saw him walk in. The whole world went strange and slow and underwater. It was honestly surreal. That's the only word I have for it. Seeing him in person, in the flesh, after all those months of him being a name in a DM and a photo of a letter and a story I told for laughs. Seeing him standing there, real and physical and in my space, it short-circuited something in my brain. For a second, I just stared. He didn't look like a monster. He never did. He just looked like Adam, a little older, a little more wrecked, swaying slightly on his feet. And every cell in my body remembered exactly what those familiar hands were capable of. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that I will be grateful for as long as I live. I was not alone. The wall I had spent months rebuilding turned out to be made of people, and those people moved. The bartender clocked him instantly and kicked him out. But Adam wouldn't go. He loitered right outside the door, refusing to leave, and that's when something happened that I still can't talk about without getting choked up. My friends got up. The bartender came around the bar. And then, strangers. Random people in that bar who had no idea who I was, who had no stake in any of this, who'd simply pieced together that there was a frightened woman and a drunk man who'd been ordered by a court to stay away from her. They got up too. A wall of people formed at that door. Friends and a bartender and total strangers, all of them standing shoulder to shoulder between Adam and me, guarding the door, telling him to leave, refusing to let him take one step closer. It was, as I said to my friends later, quite the debacle. There was shouting. There was the chaos of a dozen people all trying to manage one belligerent drunk man at once. Someone called the police. And while we waited, that wall of humanity just held the line, held it for me. I stood in the back of the bar shaking, watching people I'd never met defend me from the man who'd spent 2 years convincing me I was worthless and alone and that no one would ever stand up for me. And the entire premise of that lie, the foundational lie he'd built our whole relationship on, fell apart right there in real time, in front of my eyes, with a bouncer and a barback and 3 strangers in flannel as my witnesses. The police came. Adam was in violation of a freshly served restraining order, drunk and refusing to leave a place he'd been ordered to stay away from, with a dozen witnesses to all of it. They arrested him. They put him in the back of a car, and they took him away, and the door of that bar finally closed with him on the outside of it and me on the inside, surrounded by people who had chosen, without being asked, to protect me. I'd love to know what you think. Do you think the people in that bar made the right call, standing their ground like that instead of just letting him be and waiting for the cops? Drop a comment below, because I've thought a lot about how easily that night could have gone another way. In the aftermath, I did the practical things, because fear makes you practical. I put cameras up in my apartment, something I never felt the need to do because my neighborhood is safe and I'd always felt fine there. My friends started walking me out to my car every single night after open mic, which is something I used to do alone without a second thought. It had honestly never even occurred to me to be afraid of that walk before. Now, there was always someone beside me. My employer and my colleagues knew everything, and instead of the pity and wariness I dreaded, they were supportive, genuinely, unreservedly supportive. Even though some private, stubborn part of me still wished I'd been able to keep all of it to myself. There was no big, dramatic movie ending to it. I want to be honest about that, because life isn't a movie. There was no courtroom showdown where I delivered a stirring speech and he crumbled. There was no moment where he looked me in the eye and understood, finally, the damage he'd done. There was just a slow easing of tension, a series of practical precautions, and the quiet, uncertain hope that the worst was behind me. I knew he'd already shown he was willing to break the law, to violate a court order 2 days after being served. So I couldn't be completely comfortable. I'm not sure I'll ever be completely comfortable, but it seemed finally like it should be over. And so far it has been. People kept asking me afterward, they still ask, to hear the joke. The infamous joke that started it all. And I won't tell it. Not here, not to strangers online, not as some piece of viral content. Because that joke was never really for an audience. The audience just got to come along for the ride. That joke was mine. It was the sound of me taking back something he'd stolen, turning my worst night into something I could hold up to the light and laugh at, shrinking the thing that had once been big enough to swallow me down to a size that fit in the palm of my hand. And I think that's the part Adam could never stand. Not that I'd told a story about him. He was never named, never identified, never exposed to anyone. What he couldn't stand was that I'd stopped being afraid. That I'd taken the very worst thing he ever did to me and made a room full of strangers laugh. Because a woman who can laugh at you is a woman you no longer control. The cease and desist, the messages to my coworkers, the drunk appearances at my bar, all of it was a desperate attempt to make me feel small and watched and afraid again, to wrap that leash back around my neck. And it didn't work. He showed up to drag me back into the dark, and what he found instead was a woman standing in a lit room with a microphone, surrounded by people who would form a wall with their own bodies to keep her safe. Here's what I've learned. And it's the thing I hold onto on the nights it still creeps back in. The things that happen to us are real, and they leave marks, and we don't get to choose that. But we do, eventually, get to choose what we do with the marks. We can let them stay as wounds, tender, infected, permanent, or we can turn them into something else. A story, a joke, a scar that proves we survived. He gave me the worst night of my life, and I made it into the thing that taught me how to laugh again. He tried to sue me for it, stalk me for it, ruin me for it. And in the end, all he managed to do was prove, in front of a dozen witnesses, exactly the kind of man my joke had always quietly been about. He told everyone himself. I never had to say his name at all. Hey everyone, we're working toward 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Every one of you brings us closer. Thanks so much.